what your opinion is, that not only more developing countries should also be part of sessions like this, but also the more female net. We should also tap into more female networks. As we know, women are very essential and very instrumental of getting things done. Not scorning any male colleague, but as a matter of fact, as we see how it all developed in South Africa, for example, the anti-apartheid, how women were very instrumental of getting the work done, and not often being the ones that are being put up there or being in the media. So I would like to hear from you what you think of that. Secondly, I think the other networks, I think you mentioned a few already, people from Asia, people from Africa, Caribbean countries, Latin American countries are are beginning to play a bigger and bigger part and taking part in also networks like this, but also being an instrumental part of getting the work done, making sure anti-Semitism doesn't go being something that is being normal via the internet or whatever. Also, and the battle with the Muslims, I think the mothers are an essential part of this also, but also arts and culture. What we see sometimes, if we look at TV, MTV and other networks, when we look at the music videos, etc., what do you think of this? How can we tackle this in the near future?
Well, let me just say, I mean, yes to everything I think you've said. I mean, the role of women in the human rights movements and the civil disobedience movements of the world is, you know, absolutely striking and disproportionate and clear, that despite only a minority, say, in formal political power, they have been the agents of change in so many of these situations. And I obviously completely agree about this outreach to moderate Muslims. We must not fall into the reverse trap of demonizing the groups who we're accusing of demonizing the things we hold dear, and therefore this goes back to this issue of trying to dissolve the OIC's hard line by reaching out and winning back the moderates, and I think that is, you know, enormously important. And certainly also on issues such as culture, it's clear that that is such a bridge builder that we've got to continue with it.
I'm going to hand over to Dennis now to chair for...
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for your words and for your answers, for your stance. We in Tel Aviv University, we are in contact with about 35, 40 Jewish communities for quite a number of years. And we have the feeling that the Jewish community in England has a kind of a unique trust in the authorities, in the fairness of the authorities, in a fair reaction by authorities, by enforcing bodies such as the police, the government. And of course it's not only very commendable, but I'm sure that I express everyone's feeling in thank you, you and your government, and for this conference, the generosity, the hospitality, under the excellent chairmanship and leadership of John Mann. But let me point out and ask you the following. There is a kind of a discrepancy between this goodwill and this feeling of trust towards the government and other sections such as academia and media and violence on the street, etc. There is a discrepancy, a very visible one, not only here, in other countries as well, where governments are doing the best in the street and other bodies go their way. Would you think of a way to overcome the discrepancy, and by the leadership of the government, by addressing in these difficult times the other sectors?
Well, you know, okay. look, I mean, I think it is, in a way, part of, if you like, a broader problem that our European societies face. I think it is the most extreme and dangerous version because of the history. But, we could be talking about young Muslims in Britain also feeling that the government says the right thing and does the right thing, but that actually on the streets of our cities and in the way they're treated in much of the media, they're not being treated fairly. And, in that sense, I think all of our European countries, which, in a way were traditionally quite homogenous societies, quite stable societies, had a liberal tolerance which came easily because precisely out of that stability and the fact that minorities within the country were long established ones and, basically had become thoroughly integrated into the majority. We're now all of us dealing with a much more heterogeneous societies. And suddenly a group like British Jews, who have been as British for centuries in many cases, suddenly feel some of these pressures which are driving us apart and dividing us in a way that hasn't happened before. And in that sense, they are casualties of something which has got nothing to do with them as a group, but has got to do with a traditional society struggling to incorporate new minorities and moving to being a much more multiracial society than it was before. And you've got this phenomenon of the old institutions of the British state, the law, the government, still being very fair-minded about things, but underneath it, a bit of a social cauldron boiling. And I think we're all struggling with that. And so I think, in a way, we've got to do two things. We've got to stamp out this dangerous revival of anti-Semitism, and that needs particular steps and measures. But we've also got to understand its place in this broader problem we all have of moving from stable old European societies to new global multiracial societies. And we're all finding that a quite indigestible problem, as is showing up in our culture and our schools and our streets.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for that excellent address and the honesty of your replies. I'm Dennis McShane, also a Member of Parliament, formerly a minister like Mark at the Foreign Office, and I chaired the all-party inquiry into anti-Semitism at the invitation of John Mann, to whom I pay tribute, which I think has helped to upgrade the level of parliamentary investigation of this phenomenon. I've also written a little book which I think will arrive later. Now we're going to move into a new session. I'll release Mark to go back and ponder on Durban 2 and how to solve the global economic crisis, and I'm very glad he's there to do that for us. We will move on to a slightly better gender-balanced session, this with two distinguished colleagues who are not men to speak. But first of all, I'm going to turn to the Czech Republic, because I think it's very important, since the Czech Republic currently holds the EU presidency, that they give us their point of view, because they will speak for Europe in the period between now and the end of July. Just a little anecdote. After the Russian invasion of Georgia, President Sarkozy went to Moscow to meet with President Medvedev to try and broker at least a ceasefire, and he did that. And when it came to the news conference to announce this, they were dressing the set, and the Russians, of course, produced the big Russian flag, and Mr. Sarkozy, who was there on behalf of the European Union, his people produced the European Union flag, the Council of Europe flag, the 12 stars on a blue background, dating from 1954. And the Kremlin said, no, we don't accept that. You're here as President of France. Take that down, put up the tricolore. And it's actually to Mr. Sarkozy's credit that he said, no, I'm speaking for Europe. The European flag is there.